So this is Harvesting Infinity. I think we're up to episode 9 now. And this is Maggie Mitchell is an example of a person who harvests infinity. You can see a lot of the infinity around her. She's a creative outlier for sure, and more than one person. And Maggie, you just told me that you consider yourself an artist and an entrepreneur and a philosopher.
That's correct.
So that's a really good place to start in terms of harvesting infinity. All three of those things are examples of harvesting infinity, but to have all of those perspectives in one person's brain, that's like super cool. So pick one of them. You could either do an origin story, or you could just pick one of them and roll, and it'll come out. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love it if I can start at the beginning, in childhood. I was always the creative outlier in my family. My parents were both teachers. Everybody was very academically driven, and I was not. So I always considered myself different. My dad used to jokingly say, we're going to take care of you the rest of your life. And my dad taught physics and chemistry. But he was also very playful.
That.
Yeah. I think
I taught physics.
Yeah. So my dad was an English major, and he ended up teaching physics in to a high school class, and ultimately became a full professor and was teaching chemistry mostly to nursing students. So we would discuss Bernoulli's principle at the table, and so that was the development of my left brain. But my right brain was always into creating things. I sewed a lot of my own clothing. My parents were very encouraging and supportive, even though I had to maintain a certain average at school. And I think what I ultimately have come to see about myself is that it has always felt really important for me to have a balance of sort of left brain and right brain. So I needed to have that creativity and play in my life. But especially when I was younger, I was very motivated by money. We were, 6 of us living on my dad's high school teacher salary, which wasn't very much. And I wanted a lot of things that money could buy, and we couldn't afford at the time. So, but I hated school. When I graduated from high school, I felt like I was let out of prison, and had no interest in going into any sort of higher education. And I worked for our family dentist for a while. That ultimately morphed into, there was a lot of creativity in that also, making teeth. But I did that for about 10 years, worked in a lot of different offices. Ultimately, my first business was a temporary dental assisting service. And that kind of gave me a taste for, I can, create whatever I want, not just in the form of art, but in life itself. And, in the women's group I'm involved with now, we call it manifesting, right? Creating the life that you want. And I feel like that has sort of been my guide. I was very motivated when I was younger by money. And ultimately, I figured sales was a place where I could make money without having to go to college or have a higher level of education.
I have a question before you continue into the future. When you were a little kid and you showed up at school, did you realize that you were different than the other kids pretty early?
That's a good question. The thing that I remember the most in like elementary school and beyond, number one, it was always mentioned on my report card that, Maggie does not work up to her full potential. But I remember like sitting and the teacher, sort of like in the Peanuts cartoon, wah, 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 in the front of the class. And I would, it's almost like my soul, my spirit would be drifting out the window, and I'm watching birds in the trees. And yeah, I think other kids felt strongly that, they had to get good grades. And I really never felt, like if I liked a class, I did really well. I got straight A's in it. But if I wasn't interested, I wasn't engaged. And I had to maintain a C average, which I did even when I took physics.
But how about younger? Like even when you started like elementary school, 5, 6 years old, did you feel like you were different than the other little kids?
Well, I can remember, Howard, playing in my sandbox when I was little and creating towns and villages and branches for trees, and I would totally lose track of time or day. I mean, I would literally like go into a whole different world. And even playing, I'd have troll dolls and I don't know if other people, I mean, I always had a huge imagination. I would say that I was a dreamer, and most of the things that I've dreamed in my life have actually become my reality. So there's a certain level of, dreaminess, but also I probably would call it self-confidence that made it possible for me to make that happen. And I honestly feel like that came from having a solid foundation in childhood that was encouraged and nurtured for me to be my authentic self. And, not that I don't think any childhood is perfect. I had 3 other siblings growing up. My older brother, my younger sister, and then my younger sister, Nancy, was born 8 years later.
They were different than you were?
Yeah.
They were more straight ahead?
Everybody has at least a master's or a PhD. I'll put it that way.
So you've been creating your own world as long as you could remember.
Yeah. And, I remember having, we had some friends over. We had a bunch of property, and our friend came over with his son, Evan, who was, gosh, I don't even know, maybe 5 or 6 at the time. And we were going to go out in the woods and clear some trails. And, Evan's father is like, we're going to do this work. You're going to come. And he was like, I don't want to work, And I said, Evan, we'll let them work. We're going to play. And, I had the realization that, work and play are just 2 different sides of the same coin, right? And it's just a matter of what you're calling it or how you're describing it, right? It's just semantics at some
So
level.
you discovered the state of flow pretty early on.
Yeah.
Without having to read about it or be told about it, you went there.
Yeah. And, probably the biggest stumbling block for most people is fear. And I had a friend growing up who would bring me over to her house and make me watch these scary movies, which now are probably laughable, the Godzilla and the Mummy and the Thing. And I hated watching these things because my mind was so imaginative that when I tried to go to sleep at night, the monster would be there in my head and it would be bigger than life. And I was like, always trying to run, avoid it, get away from it. And one night, and I was little, I don't even know how old I was, I had the realization that I know that this is in my head, right? What would happen if I just stood up to it? Right? Which I did, and then next thing I know, I'm waking up the next morning.
When I met you, one of my earliest memories is that you were fearless. I met you at the Guthrie Center, and some of the people who were getting up on the stage to sing were terrified.
Yeah.
And you were so fearless that even if nobody knew the music you wanted to sing, you got up and sang it a cappella.
I sang a cappella a lot, and that was really my way of working with fear and trying to make peace with it, because trust me, on the outside I appeared calm and confident, but I was a nervous wreck. And, I still, to get up in front of people and perform, it makes me very nervous. I'm an extroverted introvert.
Well, you looked fearless to me. I thought, wow, that's really cool. She's just taking no prisoners. She's just going to go out there and go for it. So, but I want to explore that introvert-extrovert a little bit, because when I went through my psychological testing in school, they said, hey, you're exactly even on the introvert and extrovert. Oh. Same exact score. I said, so what does that mean? They said, oh, that means that you're an introvert who taught yourself to be an extrovert because it was useful to you, because you realized that you wanted to share your creativity and you couldn't do it as an introvert.
Right.
So you became an extrovert because it was convenient.
Right.
And that you may have done that.
Well, did you do the Myers-Briggs test?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm an INTJ, which is in itself unusual for a female. But yes, I learned
I was tied
how
on the
to...
I and the E and on the J and the P, and strong NT though. But it turns out it's actually fairly common that many creative people look on the outside like they're extroverts, but they found it useful to do that.
Yeah.
So they taught themselves how to do it, because I realized I was an inventor, that if I invented things and I didn't go out and sell them, that nobody would ever know that they existed. So I went from an introvert to an extrovert because I had ideas and I didn't.
Right.
So you did this, and you did this all completely naturally.
Yes, yeah. You know, it just, I feel really blessed or fortunate in my life that I would say that I've followed my heart in most things that I've done. Even when I had my business, which was a very successful business, and I was making lots of money, which was my goal at the time, what I realized was I was very much out of balance, and I was much more in my left brain masculine energy, running things, making things happen, and I really wanted to get more balance in my life. And
is that when you decided you had to be philosophical as well as creative? And
well, that probably started my spiritual journey. I started following a teacher, a woman, Annetta Knopp, who was involved with the Omega Institute, which then morphed into Blue Spirit Spiritual Retreat Center down in Costa Rica. And she was a wonderful spiritual guide and teacher for me. And she did a lot of work with women, helping to nurture the feminine energy, which in our society has really been polluted, or it's just not valued and appreciated as much as the masculine attributes, which are, you know, focus and go forward, and right, it's that. And it's easy for me to be in that energy. I was a tomboy when I was little, and, you know, I liked the masculine energy a lot. And so it was a time in my life where I really wanted to focus more on valuing the female energy within me and within the world too, right?
Did you discover this when you were a young woman, like 20, or more middle-aged, like 40?
Like more like 50.
50. Ah.
Yeah, so it's really in the last probably my late 40s into my 50s that I kind of embarked on this spiritual journey of going deeper into who am I really? Like, we all have this persona, but, you know, going deeper into, you know, what's the authentic me? And even getting up to sing. Like, I did a workshop with this guy, Claude Stein. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He lives in Woodstock. If you ever have the chance, he's usually up at Kripalu every year. Mm-hmm. And I forget what the workshop was called, but he had us get up in front of this group of people we didn't know and sing a song. And he would randomly call names. We had filled out a little card. And it was a 3-day workshop. I didn't get called. I was like the second to the last person. I was a nervous wreck the whole time. I'm like, oh my God, he's going to call my name. What am I going to do? And I grew up, my parents sang. We stood around the piano and sang. I was in my church choir and sang. And so music's always been a part of my life, and I knew I could carry a tune and sing. But I was, you know, like the fear was like that monster in the dream when I was a kid, right? And it's like, okay, well, it'll be interesting to get out there and see what happens when I face this monster.
You don't just timidly sing, though. You really
I belt
sing.
it out.
You really have a lot of power when you say, which is very cool. And so you overcame your fear by just blowing it out.
Well, and some of the fear has to do with the ego, right? So I love the expression, the ego is serious and spirit is playful, right? So when we're in that, serious, everything's got to be, that's ego talk. When we can be more fluid and playful, and that's spirit talking.
So were the philosophy thoughts and the spiritual thoughts in sync, or was, because philosophy sounds serious and if spiritual is playful?
Well, so it's interesting because my mom was very spiritual growing up, and my dad was a scientist and a self-proclaimed atheist up until right before he died. And he wanted to be supportive of my mom's efforts to bring us to church. We were Presbyterian, so everything was a little, easygoing. It wasn't strict. And I always, grew up with the stories about Jesus, and it's like, I don't know, like this isn't really, jiving with me. But I liked the philosophy aspect of helping, caring for others, compassion, all of those things. And then, with the scientific component of my father, I started feeling like, there are atoms and molecules that make up this table. We can't see them, but we know that they're there, right? And so maybe we're all the atoms and molecules that make up, what a lot of people refer to as God. I just call the spirit of the universe at this point.
Did you write about some of this stuff? Because you've been writing.
Well, I used to journal a lot. And then I started this journal, which actually my brother-in-law writes haiku, and they would come up to visit my sister and her husband, and he would leave these little Post-it notes with a little haiku when he left. And I really liked the simplicity of haiku, and so instead of writing a big long journal or pages each morning, I would write a haiku, and I really liked sort of taking thoughts and feelings, right, and distilling them down into a little 3-line poem. And I started doing this even when I still had my business at work, and I would haiku to customers, regarding their orders, and they would haiku back, and I kind of inspired people to, so I was inspired, and then I passed that on to others.
So you have a number of different dimensions of creative outputs here, from jewelry to textiles to pottery to writing to painting. So were these going on in parallel with you doing business, or did you do business first and then become an artist after?
Well, like I said, when I had my business going, pretty much all my creative energy was going into, that was like my baby, and I was keeping it alive and helping it to grow. And again, it was very much in that left brain. I became a bit of a tyrant. I had started the business, and my late husband quit his job to come work with me, and it was very difficult. It would probably be difficult for me to work with anyone. Ultimately, you learn a lot about yourself. What I learned is that I'm really good at managing myself. I'm very, I'm organized, and I get things done fast, but I'm not good at managing other people. And we had at our largest point like 15 employees, and I really wanted my late husband to be the one to organize and manage the other people working for us, but he really just wanted to be the nice guy. So I became the bitch in the office.
But there's a side of you that I've seen where you kind of like psychically feed people. So you're attentive to the needs of the group of people in front of you, and you somehow give them what they need to feel whole.
I'm better at that now, Howard. I wasn't when I had the business. It was coming back to the feminine energy, to the right brain, to that really honoring and respecting the nurturing side, the compassionate side, and being in a place where I could put other people really before myself. And again, kind of tuck the ego away and take care of others.
I've watched you take care of others, even at these open mics, people who were nervous, Azim, Eric, people were nervous, and you exuded into them some kind of, like you almost fed them psychically. You fed them some good vibes, and they calmed down, and they got up and they did their thing. So you do have that.
Well, I really like community. I mean, that was one of the reasons. I'm originally from New Jersey. I moved up here in 2012 as a full-time resident, and I really I never felt a sense of connection or community in New Jersey. I had some friends, but I was so caught up in my work that I didn't have a lot of time for that. So part of the reason I came up here as a full-time resident, we had a vacation home up here, but I wanted a greater sense of connection to community and other people. And I got involved with a women's organization that's local called Walking Our Talk. I became a facilitator and really surrounded myself with a really supportive group of friends in the form of women in my life. And that was really important for me. But I was always, when I was younger, I was always more drawn to the masculine energy. I didn't like the things that most girls, were doing or what they liked.
Well, you're powerful, and when young women are told to not be powerful because that men do that, that's going to create a cognitive dissonance for you because you knew that you were powerful.
I guess I did. It's funny. My partner now, Andy, works in a big law firm, and he talks about, how women are sort of taking over the workplace now as a result of the Me Too movement, and, that women were suppressed and pushed down. And, I honestly never felt that in my life. You
didn't need a movement to get liberated.
I didn't. Yeah, I really didn't. And I'm not really sure, maybe I was just lucky. I mean, I wasn't, a high-powered lawyer looking to get ahead, and I wasn't an actress looking to land a role in a movie.
But your parents must have made you feel valid. You must have felt like you were a valuable person and that you were valid. So you didn't need everybody else to tell you were okay. You kind of grew up thinking that you were okay.
I have never needed external validation, really. But I will say that when I was younger, I had sort of a false sense of confidence. It's kind of like when you go to boot camp, you're pushed to see what you really can do. And I feel like that's what life has done for me. I've put myself out there. I've taken risks. Starting my business was the scariest thing I've ever done. I basically had customers looking for product that the company I worked for didn't carry. And at that time, I was living in Minnesota with my late husband. We were still sort of dating at that point, but I had moved out there because we were dating across from New Jersey to Minnesota was just becoming too uncomfortable for both of us. And so I had people looking for product that we didn't carry, and I found a guy with a warehouse. He was going out of business and selling stuff, for pennies on the dollar. And I rented a truck and took $1,000, which to me was a huge amount of money at the time. And I went and I bought all kinds of stuff. And I turned around in less than a month, probably 2, maybe 3 weeks. I sold everything. I doubled my money. I went back with $2,000 and, bought whatever he had left and sold all of that and just continued to do that. I never had a plan. I laugh because my sister-in-law and my sister both teach at Wharton, one of the top business schools in the country. And I never had a business plan or, just fly by the seat of your pants and take care of people. And a lot of my customers, like I had one customer down in Maryland who came out as being gay after 30 years of marriage to me before he did to anybody else. So I had these relationships, and ultimately, to me, that's the most important thing in life is relationship. Whether it's the relationship you have with paint on paper, with people.
I don't think you were judging people too much. I think you were accepting them.
Yeah.
And I get maybe that came out of you accepting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think people who don't accept themselves tend to not necessarily accept others.
Yes.
And be insecure, but you somehow are secure and were secure. So do you want to tell us about any of these things? You brought a lot of stuff.
Well, I started many years ago doing pottery, and this is kind of an unusual technique. We actually figured out we could take liquid dish soap and add it to the glaze and blow it and make bubbles, and the bubbles actually, so I love pottery. When I started, the whole idea was that the creativity is actually going right out of your hands into the clay, right? And you're creating something very, very much hands-on. But I hate glazing.
Did you ever see a video of your on the wheel with pottery? I bet your hands would have looked very intelligent.
Yeah, I have seen a video, but it ultimately over the years, so these are just some other pieces. This is a raku piece that was actually...
So that's a wood-fired one? And these
yes.
are...
These are all kiln-fired, an electric kiln.
And this is a wood-fire. Oh, yeah. Electric kiln.
Yeah.
So it's not like real high-temperature stuff.
I didn't bring the... I have a few pieces that are salt kiln, but yeah, this one is like a slab of clay and then glazed outside. And it's amazing that the lid survived. Here, I might just put this down here. So anyway, the pottery became a lot physically on my body. You're kind of in this position where you have to anchor your arms on your thighs and you're bent over, and it's like, oh, my back was starting to bother me. And the truth is I always loved watercolors, but I was afraid. Like watercolors were scary. So, okay, so what do? I take a watercolor class. And
now, going from 3D to 2D is a pretty big change.
Yeah. That's it. And, I brought a bunch of different, so this, was probably a painting I did in like 10 minutes. And it's just a shorebird. It's very simple. I brought a bunch of, I became a leafaholic. I probably have 100 paintings of different leaves that I'm just drawn to in the fall.
This is the right place to be for leaves.
This is, I'm not sure if that's coming through with the light, but this is a painting that is actually a copy of David Hockney. I really love his work. He's been a huge inspiration. As I've kind of tried to find my own, here are some other things that I've done. And I like a bunch of different sort of styles and techniques. This one a little bit more realism. And this is one of my favorite pieces because...
don't put it away. Let him zoom in on it.
Because it's hard, very hard in watercolor to paint white. you can't really paint white. And I don't really use
and
gouache.
It's a pot.
Yeah, and it's a pot. So I always love that one a lot. I'm trying to get looser and more fluid and abstract in what I'm doing. And this one is, just inspired by my garden in the summer. And I also dabble with jewelry. These are a couple pieces. Actually, I'm wearing a necklace that I made.
This is inspired by your garden.
Yeah.
So this is less literal than those.
Correct.
This is more abstract.
Yeah.
So when you get looser, you didn't only get looser in terms of color, but feelings.
Yeah.
It's less documentary.
Well, and I think control, I think that that's a big, right, that I still, with all the realism, there's a sense of wanting to or needing to control what the outcome is. And this is something we talk a lot about in the group or class that I facilitate. I hate to call it a class, it's really a group called Art and Soul. And it's really...
Is that the one that meets on Fridays?
Yeah, we meet Fridays at the Center for Peace Through Culture. So I started going to a class that my friend Deb Kaufman was doing, calling mindfulness drawing class. And I was explaining to a friend an idea I had for a business after I closed my toy business down. I had this idea, but I was loosely calling it in my mind rendezvous, and it was a space where people could come together like a little cafe, and you could be a member and sell your artwork or your music, and upstairs there'd be a space for classes. And, it's like, I keep thinking I'd like to do this, and it's like, I don't know if and a friend said, oh, that sounds like what Deb Kaufman is doing.
iWow.
Yeah, well, iWow was one of the many things there, but she had this drawing class that met there, and
so did you take over iWow?
Well, I didn't take over iWow. There's another woman, Denise, who's continuing to sort of make that happen each month. I sort of took over mindfulness drawing class. I wanted to make it a little bit more available to people, so I called it Art and Soul instead, because it includes mindfulness and meditation and play and art and painting. And I've, these pot holders or something, I thought, this could be fun for somebody who says, I can't paint, or I'm not an artist. And so, I bought this little loom, and I've become a pot holder-aholic. And finger paints, we do finger painting. So I really want to encourage, I have some people come and knit, some people come and write poetry. Actually, one of my classmates wrote a song last week while he was doing a songwriting workshop the next day, so he wrote a song. And so it's sort of I had the opportunity to take over Deb's space after she passed. I would have had to start up a not-for-profit organization. And, at this point in my life, it was just more than I wanted to do. But so last spring, I started offering this. I do it for free. All the proceeds that are generated from the class go to the Center for Peace Through Culture, which has been nice to support them. And I'm also going to be facilitating a little a women's group about getting more into our bodies.
So how does the jewelry fit in?
The jewelry I started beading, just as a different type of expression, and I love the colors, and it's functional. I like, sort of, again, that left brain, right brain functionality thing. There's the necklace and earrings. This is another necklace and some earrings that go with it. This one is turquoise, and the one I have on is coral. I decided that, the reason I love the pot holder so much is I can make one in less than 2 hours, and it's instant gratification for my ADD.
So is it hard to manage all this energy you have? Because you have a million different ways to pour it. Do you ever feel like you're like burning rubber, like you're wanting to go faster than the world can go, and you have extra energy? I've
always been high energy. I used to be much more so. I used to bounce out of bed in the morning and go for a jog or a walk on the beach and do some yoga and then go work a 10-hour day. And I move a little bit slower.
Did you also recently complete a yoga certification too?
I'm a certified yoga instructor. I did that maybe, was that right before before the pandemic, I think. So it was probably 2019. Yeah, it was because I was teaching a class at Berkshire South, and then the pandemic happened. So, and I've done some private, but it wasn't something that I felt really passionate about. I mean, I do my own yoga every day, but almost every day.
So you live in a pretty dimensionally vast world. Which dimensions are you hanging out in right now?
Well, a lot of my energy goes into art and soul, and my partner is getting ready to retire. He is in the city during the week working, and he comes up on the weekends. So we spend, a lot of time on the weekends, like Friday through Monday together, and that eats up a lot of time and energy. And then I kind of come back to my own space during the week and catch up with friends. And
Now, is he a music guy?
he's actually a litigator, a lawyer who specializes in copyright. Music copyright law is his specialty.
Well, when he comes up here, will you drag him back into like music and performing? And
well, we both love music, and he's a real jazz fan, so he's introduced me to a much deeper world of jazz than I was familiar with before. I actually discovered when I was working for the dentist, he was a family friend, he was our dentist when I was right out of high school. He was a real jazz buff also. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Tal Farlow.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. He was a patient of ours. He was living in Seabright, New Jersey, and I can remember, I didn't know who he was, but I was in his mouth.
So, when various things happen in the world, a lot of people right now are driven crazy by elections and stuff.
Yeah.
You have all these artistic, spiritual, philosophical outlets. Are you able to kind of ride above the craziness that make everybody freak out because you're creating your own world and living in it?
I feel really fortunate to live here in the Berkshires. I call it the Berkshire bubble. And I think even though we will be affected by, what will happen in the next 4 years, we're in Massachusetts, we're in the Berkshires, it's sort of like one of those nesting dolls.
Bertrushka dolls.
Yeah. And
I agree. I feel that too. We're going to be okay.
I think we'll be okay. We were talking earlier, and my art and soul group, I try to, I offer a prompt or a topic each week, and I try to make it either something in alignment with the seasons or what's happening in the world. And so last Friday, the topic was, in art as in life, what do you do when things don't go as planned? And, of course, it opened the whole Pandora's box of what happened with the election, and everybody who was there was able to take some time to express, their anguish, their anxiety, their feelings of upset. And I think it was really beneficial for all of us to be in a group, to share those thoughts and feelings, and to sort of, purge, to kind of get them out. I mean, I didn't listen. I went to IWOW actually Tuesday night, and that was really nice to be with a group of people. I did not look at what was going on with the election when I got home. And
me too.
Yeah, the following day, though, it was just really upsetting. I mean, I just had a really hard time. Not so much that we lost the Electoral College, but the popular vote, too. And there's just this sense of, I don't understand. And I actually had reached out to a very dear friend of mine who still lives in New Jersey, who I knew to be a Trump supporter in the previous election. And I assumed he was in this one, too. He had posted or sent me some info that was very anti-Kamala. And, I reached out to him. I said, I really want to understand. I used to, when I talked to customers all over the country, I would get a better idea of what was going on outside of the bubble.
Well, as a creative outlier, whatever happens politically, economically, you kind of can ride a little bit above that. Things are never the way everybody wants them to be.
Right.
And if you're used to creating your own world and living in it, then you're somewhat shielded from the things that make everybody crazy, because you know that you can create multiple worlds,
Right.
and you have choices.
Yeah.
And you even have different modes of being. You can say, well, I'm an artist mode, or I'm an entrepreneur mode, or I think maybe I'll take a spiritual take on this. And I think that's a high evolutionary thing, in that we tend to specialize, in my opinion, a little too much. And I think being able to change modes and dabble in different dimensions is helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And especially
helpful.
as we get older, we get a little bit stuck in what's comfortable. And I think that real growth happens when we step out of that comfort zone and into discomfort. But yeah, it's not a place that most people go willingly, right? You know, like change happens, but I think most of us tend to go down fighting and screaming, and you know, and then realize in retrospect, oh, you know, maybe that wasn't so bad, and maybe this.
You know, Buddha said that all suffering is from craving.
Yeah.
And if you don't crave anything, then you don't suffer. If you're not lacking and you don't need more of this or more of that, then okay, so. Well, so this has been great. You really are a person who has spent your life harvesting infinity from the very beginning, it seems, and I guess you were fortunate to have the kind of parental support that made you realize that you had permission to do this. I have had that too, and when I met other people and I saw how constrained they were, I felt very lucky that I didn't feel so constrained. And even this business of male energy versus female energy, you can have both.
Right.
You could be a male with a lot of female energy, you could be a female with a lot of male energy, and that helps too, because you're not sort of pushed into this slot
a mold. You're
a human being who has many dimensions and does many things. And I've watched you benefit lots of people just by being present with them. And this is all new to me, this whole side of you. I thought you were a singer who painted.
I was going to say, I could sing a little a cappella too if you want.
You want to?
Well, I had thought I could just go into a verse of, I'm crazy, crazy for feeling so lonely. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but.
See? She's got it. So that's it for Harvesting Infinity today. Lots of dimensionality here. Wonderful.
Thanks, Howard.
Thanks.
It was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Okay, so you've just seen Maggie Mitchell's conversation, and she is a woman who lives in a pretty dimensionally vast universe, super duper creative outlier. I met her 10 years ago when she was a singer and I was a musician, and I didn't know that she was also a painter and a jewelry maker and a potter, and lots of other things. So I had actually created several questions I wanted to ask her, but we had such a good conversation that I never got around to asking her those questions. So I'm going to ask those questions of myself and answer them, but fold in some of the things that she said too, because it's related. So this segment is about perspective, leadership, and innovation. And I want to start with the importance of perspective in problem solving. She's run companies, I've run companies, we've both been artists. We faced a lot of problems. Some people were horrified by the selection and they're freaking out, and that's a problem. Other people are overjoyed. There are a lot of problems. But when you have a lot of different points of view, you can frequently shift the point of view to one where it's pretty simple. For example, in the audio domain, there's something called a frequency response. And if you try to figure it out in the time domain, it's very complicated mathematically. But if you just look at pitches and frequencies, it becomes obvious. Two completely different points of view. The the frequency domain and the time domain. So mathematicians have been doing transforms, Fourier transforms, S transforms, Laplace transforms, Hilbert transforms. So the science world knows that they can convert one domain into another mathematically, where things that were really complicated in one domain get really simple in another. Maggie was talking about how she sometimes is an entrepreneur, and sometimes she's a philosopher, and a spiritually oriented philosopher, and sometimes an artist. And she switches these domains. And these perspectives change our understanding of the world. They change how we respond to crises. When you have multiple viewpoints, it's really, really helpful. And I find that most of the time, when there's a conflict between two people's points of view, if you zoom out further to a different perspective, a lot of times the conflict goes away too. They're not really head-to-head as much as they thought they were. It's only when they're focused in on this very narrow perspective. The ability to tolerate ambiguity because there's more than one perspective is very helpful in a peacemaker or a mediator. So if you can view the challenges in your life from multiple perspectives and integrate these different viewpoints, it's much, much easier to solve problems. Sometimes I'm an engineer, sometimes I'm a physicist, sometimes I'm a business guy, sometimes I'm a musician, but sometimes I'm a husband or a son or a friend. These are all different roles, and we all play these different roles. So that's the first part. Perspective, really super important. Next thing is, well, when we're in one perspective or another, we're telling ourselves and others some kind of story. Oh, I'm a business person. I'm not a meditator. I'm a scientist. There's a lot of power for storytelling, and specifically, in order to collaborate with other people, you need to generally tell a story so that they're all moving in the same direction. If the people that are trying to collaborate are all telling each other a different story and they're not on the same page, it's really tough. An example is, I worked at Bose for a long time, and when they decided to make a website in the early 90s, they couldn't get on the same page. The engineering department thought one thing, the marketing department thought another, the executives another. Different sales departments, there was one group in Australia, one group in Europe. They all had different perspectives. So what they did is they took the president of Bose Europe and they recalled from Europe and they put him in charge of the website. And I went to him and said, hey, Paul, do you feel like you've really been demoted? You were the president of Bose Europe and now you're just in charge of the website. He said, how on earth could anybody who was not functioning at the level of a president get a several thousand person organization all on the same page? I hadn't realized it, but just literally a home page for a website, that requires a lot of collaboration, and it tells a story, but it has to tell one story. It can't tell a million different stories. So it turns out that there was a tremendous amount of power in storytelling, because if you can tell a story that makes sense to all these different parties, then you could begin to collaborate. Why is this important? Well, right now, we're facing 4 different problems of our own makings, humans made them, which require telling a story that's compelling enough for us to collaborate. First one is, for 80 years, we have been managing the threat of nuclear contamination. We invented atomic bombs. We set a few off. These are dangerous. They create nuclear contamination. Somehow, for 80 years, we've managed to not blow ourselves up. This is a serious amount of collaboration. A lot of countries have nukes. Any one of them could do us in. We need to collaborate about that. And the biggest reason we've been collaborating is called mutually assured destruction, MAD. It would be insane to blow up some nukes. That's one thing that we need to continue to collaborate on, or we're going to wipe ourselves out. Second one is climate change. Neither nuclear contamination nor climate change can be addressed by a single nation or a single leader, because the winds blow and they don't recognize borders. And the climate blows all over the earth too. So we can't solve climate change, and we can't solve nuclear contamination without global collaboration. We have to find a story that we can tell that everybody believes. As long as part of the world believes that global warming is fake, and another part of the world believes that that global warming is real, we're not going to be able to collaborate. So we've got to agree on some story. Third one is, we invented the internet, we invented social media, we've created all these bubbles of information where one group of people only hears one kind of information. We didn't anticipate this. When we created the internet, we thought everybody would talk to each other and the truth would emerge, and it hadn't occurred to us that it would be powerful for manipulation. We can't collaborate if everybody's living in different bubbles of communication with a different story, but we have to, because these stories, which know no boundaries, because the internet knows no boundaries, differ. So we've got to get it together in an appropriate story about how do we use the internet, how do we use social media in order to collaborate. And the fourth one is maybe bigger than all the rest. Fourth one is, we invented AI, and it is definitely not contained, and it's very powerful, and it could be really dangerous, and it could be really useful. It all depends on if we manage it, and we can manage it, but in order to manage it, we have to collaborate on telling a story that makes sense to everybody about AI. Not the story that AI is going to decide it likes it better when it's cold because chips are better cold, so it's going to turn down the thermostat and have a nuclear winter and have clouds shield us from the sun. That's not a good story to tell about managing AI. We also don't want to tell the story about it's going to take away all the creative people's jobs in the world because it does all the writing and the movie making. That's not a good story either. We could tell some other stories like, well, if we really want to solve global warming, we might ask AIs what to do about it. They can help us solve problems that we can't solve ourselves. 4 gigantic problems: nuclear contamination, global warming, internet bubbles of points of view in social media, AI. Human beings created all 4 of these problems, and human beings can solve all of these problems when and if we decide to collaborate. And we can collaborate, but we've got to start getting on the same page, like a homepage, about those stories. So, next one, third one I want to talk about here is the role of creative outliers in societal change. As I've said on this program many times before, Harvesting Infinity is really about innovation. And where do innovators come from? Innovators come from the population of people who are creative outliers. Maggie, who was just interviewed, serious creative outlier. I'm a creative outlier. In fact, almost all of my friends are creative outliers. The people who work here at the station are creative outliers. The good news about being a creative outlier is where are the people where tomorrow comes from? We invent it. Inventors, authors. It is not politicians and lawyers and business people who create tomorrow for the most part. It's creative outliers. If some of those creative outliers happen to also be a business person or a leader, well, maybe something will happen. But if they're all trying to just steal power from each other and play follow the leader, we're not going to be able to create tomorrow. Creative outliers are the people that do this. And this whole program, Harvesting Infinity, is about having conversations with creative outliers who have managed to harvest infinity, many of whom have managed to become innovators. These creative outliers are the ones who drive social change, because they look at the way things are and they go, well, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be this other way instead. And then they go create the other way. It's hard to convince people of the other way. There's a lot of fear, resistance to change. Creative outliers end up having to figure out how to sell their ideas. And as we heard in this last interview, sometimes it forces them to go from being introverts into extroverts, because if you have a lot of great ideas and you don't have the ability to communicate, then these ideas are going to not get anywhere. They're not going to cause change. Okay, got a few more. The balance between idealism and pragmatism. Artists always have this problem. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm a composer. I hear pieces of music in my head that have 100 instruments, but I can't play 100 instruments at a time. I can only play one at a time, and I can't play 100 instruments anyway, only, 4 or 5. We're constantly having to balance the signal-to-noise ratio with how loud I want to play. Which colors of paint do I have available on my palette to make this painting? Creative people are incredibly pragmatic. I know they get a bad rap for living in outer space because they don't always toe the line and do what everybody wants them to do. But they have to be very pragmatic or they couldn't create any art. They couldn't create any music. They couldn't finish publishing the book. They couldn't get anything done. You have to be incredibly down to earth and pragmatic to get anything done at all. But if you're not an idealist, then you're not going to ever say something new. You're just an imitator. If you're a cover band, that's not the same thing as writing new music. If you're imitative, well, that's nice, but if creative outliers don't want to be imitative. They want to do new stuff, and they have to find ways to complement each other, the idealism and the pragmatism. Otherwise, they can't be leaders. If you're a leader who lives totally in outer space, but you're not down to earth because you don't pay attention to the people who you're trying to lead, what their capabilities are, what their needs are, what their desires are, you can't lead unless you're pragmatic. But if you're not idealistic, then you may not have anybody to lead because just doing the same old thing is not very compelling. That's called being a manager, not a leader. Being a manager is not necessarily being a leader. Being a leader is necessarily being a manager because leaders do have to pragmatically manage their idealism along with their pragmatism. I got 2 more I want to talk about in the remaining minutes. Transcending current realities. There's this word called meta. Meta means beyond in Latin. Metaphysical, beyond the physical. Metamorphosis, beyond the shape of something. A lot of people that I run into seem to be meta. They're having a conversation about the conversation. They look at what's wrong and they don't just go directly to the problem. They go to, how do we even think about this before we try to solve the problem? Having a meta approach is one of the ways that leaders can get individuals to get on the same page, just like this home page. Meta means beyond. It's beyond the interests of just marketing versus sales, who from an engineer's perspective, marketing and sales sounds like the same thing. What do you mean the sales guys and the marketing gals are not on the same page? They're the same department. No, they're not. Sales is transaction oriented. We're going to sell something, we're going to get some money in, we're going to put something out there. Marketing is about positioning. If you want to be a CEO, you've got to be meta about marketing and about sales. You've got to be thinking beyond the needs of a particular group. And the very last one I want to talk about is the evolution of human collaboration and adaptation. Okay, we humans are not the strongest species on the planet. We're not the fastest, we can't fly, we can't hold our breath for 10 minutes. But what we really are better at than everybody else, besides collaborating, which we are better at than everybody else, is adapting. Human beings adapt. We adapted to the Ice Age. We are going to adapt to global warming. We adapt to changes in power, where people in power may not be the ones you want, or the people who were in power before might not be the ones you want. Human beings adapt all of the time. That's how we went from being prey to the alpha predator on the planet. We've wiped out more species than anybody else. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but we did it because of our ability to adapt. Adapting and collaborating kind of come together. By the way, we've been collaborating for 300,000 or 400,000 years. Collaboration existed before Homo sapiens did. Homo is a genus, and sapien is the species. There were Homo erectus. There were 6 or 8 other ones whose names I can't recall, but they all evidently started collaborating. According to anthropological and archaeological evidence, we started collaborating 300,000 or 400,000 years ago in our desire to adapt to circumstances. Like, well, we ran out of food over here, so we have to go there, but over there is on the other side of the water. So we invented boats. We invented these things hundreds of thousands of years ago, even before we invented language. So we've been collaborating longer than we have been speaking. We didn't start to speak until about 150,000 years ago, and it took till 50,000 years ago till we got a shared vocabulary. It took us 100,000 years to figure out how to talk, but we had already been collaborating 100,000 years before that. And why? Because we had to adapt to changing circumstances. We're really, really super good at it. And right now, we have created a ton of technology, which is super terrific at adapting and collaborating. What do you think AI is? AI is the latest in our infinite realm of new creations that allow us to adapt and collaborate. That's all for today. Episode 9 of Harvesting Infinity. And I hope that you're a creative outlier trying to figure out how to become an innovator, and that some of these things we're talking about inspire you to bring your stuff out into the world. That's it. I'm Howard Lieberman, by the way.